Today's lesson is going to focus on continuing our discussion of the principles of the Constitution, and our topic focus today is limited government. What the founders faced was a dilemma. They wanted a more efficient government. They wanted a government at the national level that could respond to the nation's problems and help our country grow. But at the same time, they had that fear that we discussed yesterday of tyranny. They didn't want a government to become so tyrannical that it could dominate and ruin the lives of its citizens. So there are a couple things that they did to ensure limited government. Number one is they set up a constitutional government, and you had powers listed in the Constitution. When we rewrote the Constitution in class, what you should have seen is that there were a lot of specific listed out powers, especially in Article 1, Section 8. It tells government what they can do. Now, if you go back to our discussion of the ratification politics, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, one of the biggest arguments that the Anti-Federalists had was that there was a need for a Bill of Rights, that there was a need to limit the power of the national government and to ensure that there was a protection for basic rights for citizens. So the Bill of Rights was added. It was a safeguard against tyranny from the new, strong, distant government. At the time of the founding, very few people feared their state governments. They trusted the local government to protect them, but they had a fear of the national government. So that's why we have the importance of Amendment 10, which is the one that reserves power to the states. It views this idea that the substantial power will be vested in the hands of the states. Now, the other thing that was put into limit government were free elections, that you have the ability to vote out people that abuse power. Now, by itself, though, this constitutional government and these elections are not enough to constrain the government. That's why we saw those previous principles, the idea of separation of power and checks and balances, built into the system. It's all of these things combined that help to create the total picture of what the founders intended. Now, our final principle for today's discussion is the idea of judicial review. Now, this is the power, the definition here of judicial review. It is the power of the courts to rule on the constitutionality of any action of Congress or the President. This power to review the constitutionality of the President and Congress's actions is not specifically written in the Constitution. But if you read the Constitution clearly, it is a very vague and open document. It's written in broad terms. And there was a need for interpretation of the Constitution and its powers, and that naturally falls to a judicial branch. Now, it's important to understand the history of judicial review. It is established by the court case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803. So what happened is there was the end of the Federalist control of government when Adams lost the election to Jefferson. And so what Adams did as he was leaving office is he appointed the midnight judges, including Marbury. Now, as Jefferson took over, he ordered that Madison not deliver the commissions to these new judges who would be Federalists, who would be ruling on Federalist favor. So he ordered Madison to not deliver the commission to these judges. So what happened is there was a lawsuit, and Marbury sued and said that the court had the power under the Judiciary Act of 1789 to force Madison to deliver his commission so that he could become a judge. And here's what John Marshall, who was the Chief Justice, did in constructing his decision. He ruled that the court did not have the authority to force Marbury to become a judge. The court did not have the power to use that provision of the Judiciary Act of 1789. That was a weakening of judicial power in the short term, but an expansion of judicial power in the long term, because what ended up happening is judicial review was established, and now the court has the authority to go back and look at all lawsuits or all laws that Congress passes and determine whether or not they're constitutional. So it ended up being a big victory for the Federalists and for the judicial branch.